So we're going to talk about our final group of disorders, which are neurodevelopmental disorders. These disorders involve distortions in the development of basic psychological functions. So these things are social skills, language, perception, or motor behaviors. So these are basic functions that we develop as children, right? But we know that they are cognitive, so that's where that neuro part comes from. So the development of our cognition is where these disorders occur, and they usually are diagnosed during infancy, childhood, or adolescence. So the first, probably most well known of these disorders is autism spectrum disorder. This was made into a spectrum, right? Because we know that the symptoms of this disorder vary from person to person drastically. And the spectrum now includes the highest to the lowest functioning individuals. So all the way from Asperger's syndrome at the very, very high to the very, very low end of disorders. So we have this full spectrum. Typically, someone with ASD is going to show an unusual pattern of social and cognitive development beginning in childhood. And the important part is that it shows marked difficulties in social interaction and communication. Like I said, it now encompasses all the categories that used to exist separately. So, for instance, Asperger's syndrome on the high end and pervasive developmental disorder on the other end. The new diagnostic criteria have also been rearranged into two different areas. So the social communication and interaction category, and then the restrictive and repetitive behaviors category. So the symptoms have been rearranged. So the onset of autism spectrum disorder usually is before the age of 3. And usually much earlier we catch it now, okay? Because there's more success in treatment if we can catch it earlier. So autism spectrum disorder is more frequently in males, 4 to 5 times more likely in males than in females. And then about 70% of people with autism spectrum disorder have an intellectual disability. So what that means is that not everyone does. Some people have an intellectual disability, but not all do. So some of the characteristics of ASD are impairment in social relationships, a lack of awareness, or really the lack of existence or awareness of existence of other people. They may not like to be touched or held. They might avoid eye contact and then prefer solitary play. Impaired speech is another characteristic. About half of autistic children do not develop speech at all. And oftentimes when children do develop the speech, it's often in terms of like an echo. It could be echoing things that they have just heard. So if someone asks them a question, they might repeat the question. Or it can be an echo of like a movie or a TV show that they have seen. And oftentimes they only need to see that TV show or movie one time in order to repeat that that phrase or the movie. They usually have a very narrow range of interests and activities. It's this fixation on a particular object or particular activity. So it might be dinosaurs, and then everything that they do is focused solely on dinosaurs. And this might become almost an obsession for the person. And then sameness and routine is super important for people with ASD. Usually this will make someone with ASD distraught and angry if their routine is completely thrown off. And if their routine is thrown off, they often engage in self-soothing behaviors to block out this extrasensory information that's coming in. And so what we think is that there isn't a filter to block out all of the sensory information that is coming into their brain, meaning they don't have the ability to have selective attention. Whereas we might black out a TV that's on in the background, a person with ASD cannot. And so this is going to be extremely overwhelming for them. Imagine if you have to pay attention to everything that's going on around you. You would be really stressed. And so for someone that is going through that, they're going to have to self-soothe in order to calm themselves down. So sometimes this is humming, rocking back and forth. Sometimes it can become self-harming, where they might hit themselves or scratch themselves in order to soothe. So the causes, there is a lot of debate about the causes of autism spectrum disorder, like a ton of debate. This is a huge controversial topic in the psychiatric and psychological community. But like everything else we have talked about, there's likely both genetic and environmental causes. There have been a number of genes that have been identified that are associated with the disorder. And then we also have seen that people with ASD have found irregularities in several regions of the brain, as well as abnormal levels of serotonin or other neurotransmitters in the brain. So we do know that there's some genetic cause. However, there's probably also environmental causes as well. Okay, moving on to the next disorder. Probably the most another one of the most well-known of these disorders is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is important for you to know the terms and the way that we're going to talk about this, so that if you're writing an FRQ about this disorder, you're talking about it articulately rather than just like common knowledge. So this is a developmental disability involving a short attention span, distractibility, and an extreme difficulty in remaining inactive for any period. So this person is really not able to kind of like sit still. The disorder is estimated to affect between 3 to 5% of school-age children, and there are 3 different subtypes of the disorder. So there's the predominantly hyperactive and impulsive branch. There is the predominantly inattentive subtype, and then there's the combined hyperactive, impulsive, and inattentive. So let's look at each of these things that are characterized by ADHD. So the inattention. If a person with ADHD is easily distracted, they might miss details or forget things. They're going to frequently switch from one activity to another. They cannot focus on one thing, and they become bored with the task that they're focusing on unless they're enjoying it. So they cannot force their focus, right? They have to be, that has to come naturally. They have difficulty focusing attention on organizing or completing tasks. It's difficult for them to learn something new because, again, they can't really pay attention to it. And then they have trouble completing or turning in homework assignments, often because they might forget them or because they might lose them or just not have been paying attention. Also, they might not seem to be listening when spoken to, so they might be making eye contact, but they're actually paying attention to something else. Daydreaming is really a big characteristic of ADHD, difficulty processing information as quickly and as accurately as others, and then a struggle following directions. Okay, the hyperactivity part of it, this person is going to fidget and squirm because they are unfocused and distracted. They might talk nonstop. They might dash around the room, touching or playing with anything in sight. Have trouble sitting still during dinner, school, or story time. They need to be constantly in motion, have a difficulty doing quiet tasks or reading, all because of this inattentiveness, right? And then finally, the next is the impulsivity. So they are impatient. They might blurt out inappropriate comments, show their emotions without restraint, and act without regard for consequences, have difficulty waiting for things or waiting their turn. They often interrupt conversations or other activities. Again, all because of this inattentiveness, right? Because their mind can't focus, this impulsivity just kind of comes with that. So causes, obviously, just like everything else, there's a combination of genetic and environmental factors, and the treatment for ADHD actually involves administering stimulant drugs, which might sound kind of weird because if someone is already hyperactive, why would we want to give them a stimulant that would make them more? But drugs like Adderall, Ritalin, and Concerta actually seem to have the opposite effect on children with this disorder. Um, and but they do have adverse side effects, meaning negative side effects. So like a catatonic state, flat affect, feeling like a zombie. Um, and then individuals with ADHD may have other disorders as well, such as learning disability, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, anxiety disorders, depression, or bipolar. One of these disorders does not cause the other, but the symptoms of one might make the other one more noticeable or more severe. Okay, let's talk about ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. This is where a child is going to be defiant, right? In the name. Usually this behavior starts by the age of 8, but it could start as early as the preschool years of 4 or 5. And to be diagnosed with this, the symptoms must last for at least 6 months and be more than normal childhood misbehavior. So all of these things are going to probably happen, right, in most children, but if they're happening frequently for a long period of time and happening more intensely than other childhood misbehavior, then the child might have oppositional defiant disorder. So the symptoms are actively not following an adult's request, being angry or resentful with others, arguing with adults or other authority figures, blaming others for their own mistakes, having few or no friends, or having lost friends, constant trouble in school, losing their temper, being spiteful or seeking revenge, or being like easily annoyed. The pattern of behaviors must be different from those of the children around them. Okay, so this has to show that it's somewhat dysfunctional and deviant from the norm, right? The behavior is thought to be caused by a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors. Obviously, we've talked about that with every one of them, right? Okay, next is conduct disorder. Conduct disorder has been associated with child abuse, genetic deficits, poverty, parental drug addiction, or alcoholism. So there's a correlation between those things and conduct disorder. Okay, so when a child is in an abusive family, they're more likely to have conduct disorder. There's a relationship, right? The diagnosis is more common among boys. Children with conduct disorder tend to be impulsive, difficult to control, and unconcerned about the feelings of others. This should sound familiar because oftentimes people with antisocial personality disorder, adults, which cannot be diagnosed in children, but need to show symptoms before by the age of 15, that that person probably has been diagnosed with conduct disorder or could be diagnosed with conduct disorder. They have very similar antisocial behaviors. Remember, antisocial meaning not that they don't want to be around others, but that they shouldn't be around others, right? No, or like against social norms or against good social behavior. So some of the symptoms, like I said, antisocial behaviors such as bullying and fighting, breaking rules without any reason to, being cruel or aggressive towards people or animals, fighting, using weapons, forced sexual activity, mugging, purse snatching, destroying property like starting fires or breaking and entering, drinking or drug use, lying to get a favor or avoid obligations, running away, truancy before the age of 13, and vandalism. Children with this disorder may go on to develop other personality disorders, particularly antisocial. And then if their behavior worsens, these individuals may also develop significant drug and legal problems. Okay, that wraps up our discussion of the different disorders. We are going to move on from here to the treatments of the disorders.